Let me first thank Vikram and the advisory board of Manthan for continuing the important work that was started many years ago with Ajay as a major inspiration and driver, for instituting this lecture in his memory, and for inviting me to deliver this inaugural address. I know it's been a bit of a rough day for travel and logistics. I'm very grateful you all came out. And in the spirit of more of a debate or a dialogue, I'll try and restrict my remarks and leave a lot of time for Q&A. I only ever met Ajay once when I came in 2015, as Vikram just mentioned. But through my own personal experience at the passing of my father, who I had lived away from for decades before he passed, the lesson I take and I took is that the mark of a person is only really felt after their passing, in the institutions they built, in the voids they leave in people, in the impact their work has for generations and years to come. In that sense, I think all of you here today represent the major impact that Ajay had at a time when there wasn't the kind of premium on free speech that there is today. He had the vision to start this as a exchange of ideas and continue it as things became more and more constrained. I remember my earlier talk, and I just want to say that when I came, I had left banking and I had not yet joined public office. So at some level, it was a leap of faith to call me, 7, 8 years after the collapse, after many books had been written, after many lectures had been given, and ask me to speak. But I think that was the value that Ajay placed on the judgment of those he trusted. And so I think almost sight unseen, maybe on some exchanges over WhatsApp or email, I was asked to come and speak. And I'll never forget, it was a warm evening. There were some dogs lazing around asleep here. The crowd was much less than today. And at the end of the talk, Ajay came almost bouncing from his seat, and you could see the sparkle in his eye. And he was so excited because I think there had been some perspective, some ideas, some data, some insight that was maybe even a bit more than he'd expected. And I still remember him literally, bouncing here. And I think I spoke for 30 or 35 minutes, and then we had like another 45 minutes or something Q&A. And there was the enthusiasm that he brought to the sharing of ideas and the value of debate in a society, in a democracy. So in that sense, I consider myself very privileged to have this opportunity, and I thank you once again to deliver this address. The topic that's been given to me is perhaps a bit, I won't say beaten to death, but a bit well discussed, starting with this morning or this afternoon in a different event. But I'll try and maybe take it to a level that is normally, we normally stop with the notion of federalism between union and state governments. We don't really go down to the local bodies. And also, in some ways, the complexity of going to local bodies is much higher than the complexity of union-state relations. So I'll just maybe highlight a few things, and then we can go for a bit of a dialogue. Let me start first. I'll try and kind of come through two strands and bring it all together. Let me start first with the notion of democracy. Right? In an economic model that is not public ownership, that is not communism, shall I say. The risk of any model of governance other than a monarchy or a dictatorship is if you keep everybody vested in the system, then the system can have equilibrium and exist. But the nature of economics, the nature of competition, the nature of game theory is that it's very hard for you to keep equilibrium. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. This is the nature of all economic activity at all times. It gets exacerbated when you have things like crises or huge shifts in things like globalization, access to capital, transfer, cost of travel, etc. In fact, Karl Marx went so far in his manifesto as to say that effectively what would happen in a non-communist, non-public ownership society would be that the returns to capital would keep on increasing and the returns to labor would keep on decreasing. And at some point, the labor would just revolt and say, what's in it for me? And you'd have, revolution. And then everybody would go back to public ownership. The antidote to that was supposed to be democracy. It was supposed to be that if you went to one person, one vote, irrespective of how wealthy or how poor, then the people would vote only for those who would keep equilibrium, who would keep inclusion, who would keep everybody along with them. And therefore, the worst excesses of a Marxian prediction would not come true. But in fact, there are many models of democracy itself, right? There are those purists who would argue that any complex issue should be taken to referendum every time. There are those who would say we should have only one or two levels of government. There are people like me who say we should have government closest to the people. So it's not clear which is the best model of democracy. There's also the question of efficiency versus participation. Is there one policy that therefore makes it easy, everybody's going down the same path? Or do you have different, within the same umbrella, different approaches, different policies? Is that a better outcome even though it's more complex and difficult to implement? Then there's the question of stability versus accountability. Should we have elections every 2 or 3 years, like they do in, let's say, Australia? Or should we have, 5 years or 6 years? Continuity, stability allows me to learn the job, execute, bring results. But if I'm no good at it, if you let me sit for 6 years, I may cause real damage to the system. There's a lot of question also of timing. When the country is nascent and the notion of democracy is new, then maybe you need some kind of a cohesive union government that basically brings everybody together in a land that is culturally diverse and that's got thousands of years of history. You create a country just because we say so. And you still have many residual kingdoms and all that stuff that you have to integrate later. So, what's the kind of right trade-off in how you design the model and how much power or authority or capability, responsibility you place at which level of democracy? And all of these things basically vary across time, right? If you look around the world, as scale increases, as complexity increases, as education levels increase, as economic standards increase, people want more and more access to self-determination. And you find that devolution of power is the norm in any developing country, in any advancing economy. So if we take that as the notion of democracy, let me start from a separate thread, which is the Dravidian movement that many generations of my forefathers helped to create and then perpetuate till now. And at the core of the Dravidian movement was this notion that all people are born equal and that there should be the notion of self-respect, that there is no hierarchy that says who is higher, who is lower, who is middle, who can go where, who can touch what, who should walk where. And so it says you don't need a validation system outside of you. It starts with self-respect. And you go from self-respect to say, okay, then everybody should have the right to achieve their full potential, and things that we now call inclusive growth or social mobility and all that, baked into this concept that if anybody can be anybody, then really education is the basis. You have to start with giving education, because in the past, education was restricted to certain people and not everybody was given access. So you start with self-respect, equal access to education. And at least in the case of the Dravidian movement, the first priority was equal rights to women. So in 1921, when the Justice Party government was formed, voting rights for women, legislature that's women, compulsory elementary education for boys and girls in 1921. So you start from that notion that all are born equal, all should have equal access, all should start with education as the conversion factor that goes from millennia or centuries of a hierarchy into a more neutral structure of society, or more balanced or equal. Then it doesn't take long for you to go that everybody should have access, everybody should have rights. The system should be reverse engineered to make up for millennia of discrimination by having quotas, reservations, percentage of the population equals percentage of the seats, etc. Thinking for oneself, what is called rationalism. And eventually it takes you to the only logical conclusion, says, I should have a role or a say in my future, the right to self-determination. And the likelihood of having self-determination is much more, what can I say, reachable or envisionable should that governance level be closer to me. So if I take in my constituency in Madurai, the average councillor in the Madurai Corporation has about 10,000 voters and likely lives within that 10 or 15th street area that those voters live in. I'm an MLA, I have about 250,000 voters. My MP covers 6 MLA constituencies, has about 1.5 million voters. The odds that the voters can even reach the MP is pretty close to zero. So the likelihood of the voice being heard, the likelihood of you being able to hold somebody accountable is much higher if it is a better ratio and closer to you. So in this context, it was very clear from the early days of Dravidianism that local self-governance, in particular states' rights and devolution of powers to district boards, to taluk level and to the village panchayats was a key factor. In fact, the other day I was going to Palanivel for the temple function, and I saw a defunct bridge on the side where somebody told me, go look at the stone, inlay, inscription. And it was some 1920 something. My grandfather had opened a bridge, and the district board president had been the one that had funded the bridge, and my grandfather had come as a minister and opened the bridge. Right? So I'm saying 1920s, there was a district board that had the money to lay bridges. That was the devolution. So I put both these strands together and say, if giving people participation in democracy, if at the core of federalism is the notion that I should have some say in how my government, my society, my government's policies and schemes are run. And in particular, that if it is going to be a complex or a big thing, that I should have a seat at the table. I'm not saying it'll go my way, but I should have the capacity to be in the debate. And that's really at the heart of federalism as I see it and as we talked about it earlier today. Now, if you look around the world, this is a commonly cited context, so I won't bore you with the details, but I lived 20 years in the US. In the US, the local village or town or city runs the school board. It runs the police. It sets the alcohol policy. It sets some portion of the local taxation. In fact, in cities of New York and LA, you have income taxes. Then you go from there to the county. And in my county where I lived in Erie County, they set the hours of opening, the sales tax, certain broad templates within which the cities and the villages can work. And then we go to the state, and the states actually started out as independent governments that chose to come together in the United States of America. So from the beginning, 100% of the rights were with them, and they gave up some of it to the Union government of the United States. So in a place like that, the great advantage is the school board sets the syllabus for that set of schools. The parents of that town or that village get to be on the school board. Therefore, they get to determine what their children study, not somebody in the state of New York, certainly not somebody in Washington, D.C. So you take that as the capitalist model of extremes. Then you go the other way, and you go to China. In China, the city of Shanghai runs its own pollution control board, runs its own police, runs its own schools, runs its own environmental clearance, industrial permits, everything. And the provinces issue banking licenses. I used to work for a large global bank called Standard Chartered Bank. Standard Chartered Bank couldn't get, there's no such thing as a pan-China license. You have to get a province by province banking license and the ability to open branches in that province. These extremes of communism and capitalism have significantly devolved powers because they are large, complex organizations, and it's not imaginable that sitting in one place you can run these things. Forget if the policy is even similar. The execution ability sitting in one place is close to zero. So you devolve, or you start with my rights, of which I'll give up some to you. You take other countries, you take Germany or Australia, or for that matter, you take a Switzerland, tiny country, shouldn't have that much complexity. But in Switzerland, if you want to go through an immigration process to get permanent residency, that canton has to decide whether you're fit to become a PR or a citizen of Switzerland, right? Because they say you're going to live there, that society should have a say in whether you're an apt citizen. Now, of course, there can be, some excesses. For example, if you're in a place where they teach creationism, then clearly that's an unacceptable way of educating children, right? If you're in a place that endorses bigotry, clearly, or racism, clearly you cannot run a police force that is openly racist, at least. So you have to have some checks and balances. And really, in India today, these are the two levels at which we should think about it. When it comes union to state, I think the issues are not that complicated. They're not that complicated because pretty much everybody had one goal till about 8 and change years ago, including the current Prime Minister of the country, who, when he was Chief Minister, was the greatest, most articulate, most vociferous advocate for states' rights. Now all of a sudden we find the world is somehow turned upside down. But where the real complexity comes in is between the state and local governments. And I'll give you a few perspectives from Tamil Nadu. But before I do that, I'll say why there should only be a secular movement towards more devolution or decentralization is very clear. As size increases, complexity increases. And as complexity increases, diversity increases. As diversity increases, the need for customization increases. The likelihood of customization being successfully done is much closer to the people than very far away from the people. First of all, because there's no one place where you can come up with 31 different state policies. That's what the state governments are for. If you look at our country today, the state level variability is huge. Between the best and the worst state on any measure, if you started at independence, the ratio is probably no better than 2:1 for the best state. By the 1980s, that had probably expanded to 3 or 4:1. Then came reform. Every time you have something like reform, which is another version of what I just said about globalization. Those that are poised, those that have built the infrastructure for it. In the case of Tamil Nadu, it was a highly educated English-speaking workforce with decent physical infrastructure. Those will benefit hugely disproportionately. And then the gap started really expanding. And so if you look over the last 20, 30 years, the worst to the best state in some measures, maybe 10:1, 20:1. You take some states like Tamil Nadu, about a third of our budget comes from our share of the taxes sent from us to the union that comes back, some fraction of it. You take some states, you take Bihar, 80% of the annual budget of Bihar comes from the union government. You take Northeast, probably 95% of the budget comes from the union government. So you have seen such a huge variability in development across states, not just in economic terms, but in social indicators, human indicators, education levels, access to medicine, number of doctors per 1,000 people, pick any measure. But if you look within a state, the change has not been that great. Even in Tamil Nadu, where I'd say there is a rural-urban divide, it's not nearly as big a divide as state-to-state divide. Partly because, in fact, devolution to the local bodies never started till very late, and till now is very minimal. So even though the Constitution calls for many things that one could equate to self-determination or devolution down to the lowest level, and Gandhi one time had this dream of 5 lakh village panchayat governments or something to that effect. But really it was only in the 73rd and 74th amendments in 92, I think, that even the concept of local bodies and Schedule 12, which created their responsibilities, came about. And it's been applied relatively unevenly ever since. But in some cases, some people argue that maybe lack of devolution to local bodies has been a reasonable thing, or maybe a good thing. A friend of mine, who is the vice chairman of the Tamil Nadu Planning Commission, State Planning Commission, has written a book where he says the significant improvement in caste relations and the significant improvement in the universality of service provision in rural areas came when the government of Tamil Nadu decided to do away with this concept of a Natame or, village panchayat, elected by itself, not through the democratic model, but through the caste system and all that, and centralize the delivery of services through line departments of the state of Tamil Nadu. So the meal scheme or the education scheme, they are not run. They are, in theory, they have a local reporting line. In practice, the government of Tamil Nadu set the standard for all schools run in the government of Tamil Nadu, not panchayat by panchayat, and that actually improved a lot of the poor panchayats in his perspective. Access to, let's say, seats in local bodies is reserved based on the constitutional design, and so many seats are meant for Adi Dravidars, so many seats are meant for women, etc. In theory, that works. In practice, if you look around, particularly in Tamil Nadu, but in many cases, you find the system gets subverted many ways. You take Madurai Corporation, where we recently held the elections. 50% of the seats are for women. Who are the women candidates? In many cases, they are the spouses of the men who would otherwise have been the candidates. And they're not actually the qualified women based on their own standing. It's still better than nothing because, by the time they're 5 years sitting in the seat, at least some of the women will start to feel the power of their constitutional position, because only they can attend the council meeting, the husband cannot. Only they can call the staff and ask questions, the husband cannot, or at least should not be able to. Then we find other outcomes where there are either no elections held or so-called unanimous elections. My chief minister recently, after we came to office, went and had a Grama Sabha meeting in village where for 10 years after the act was passed, elections were not held because it was designated a reserved constituency, and the caste people would not allow the ballots to stand, and then it became a mess, and there were some murders and all that. And then he himself, when he was minister in 2006, he personally went, stayed in those villages, ran the elections, got the result, and came out. So this was the commemoration of that. He went 15 years later to do that. That's some of the downsides of devolution. Of course, as education levels go up, as access to kind of global information goes up, for example, many people criticize the free color television set, the 2,000 rupee color television set that the DMK government of 2006 to 11 instituted. தலைவர் Kalavar did it for a different reason. He said, in too many places, we see poor people standing outside rich people's houses and trying to look through their windows at the TV screen. And basically, this creates, again, this feudal hierarchy. And so we should get a TV to everybody's house. That was his intent. But now if you look at the studies, there is a clear evidence that the level of domestic violence dropped dramatically after village women started seeing what the notion of life was in the cities and in other parts of the world, and that this was not the only way and they didn't have to take this. So, there's all these ways that society progresses that we don't sometimes envision. But eventually we'll get to a place where clearly we should do a lot more devolution. I'll just close with two examples that I would say give me hope of how we can actually do much better with devolution, and then maybe give you a bit of a sobering thought based on a study my additional Secretary of Finance sent to me. The two positive examples, when we came to office, we had the second wave of COVID, and it hit us probably within 10 days of taking office at the peak. In Madurai district, we were seeing maybe 1,500 cases or 1,300 cases a day. We got the best minds together. We talked about how to deal with this. We did a lot of analysis. We discovered that the biggest, source of infection was that everybody was coming to the district general hospital, and every patient was bringing 3 attendants, 5 attendants, and was spreading between those people. So we basically decided we have to find a way to distribute this and keep the infected people closer to their homes and not come here. So we went through many things. We made probably 10 different improvements. But the improvement that made the whole difference, or the biggest difference, was we decided to set up 10-bed hospitals with oxygen tanks, because the second wave was not that virulent. It just needed the right oxygen like 2 weeks into the infection or something. In every panchayat, and we got 4,000 women under the women self-help groups, and we got them to go door to door and find people who were showing symptoms and take them to the local panchayat hospital rather than bring them to the GH. We instituted some strict limit on how many people could come to the GH. We gave free lunch to everybody who came, so they didn't have to go and start looking for food and infecting other people in the area and all that. We did maybe half a dozen things. It wasn't maybe 10 things. But because we took this distributed strategy, the daily rate went down from 1,500 to 150 in probably 3 weeks. Nowhere else in Tamil Nadu, within the same state, with the same infrastructure, with the same kind of, doctor-patient ratio and everything, nowhere else did it go down that much. So clearly the ability to customize, the ability to localize, that's a classic example where I think we can show the upside of doing this in a evolved way. The second example I'll give is we have just day before yesterday, my Chief Minister started a free breakfast program for school children, a pilot basis. And this was based on some data. We had some blessing. Actually, the irony is we thought we were doing it for the poorest and the government schools and all that. But even in the last 2 days, we're hearing from a lot of middle-class people saying that working women find it very hard to give cooked food to their children before they go to school at 7 or 7:30. So really, this ought to be a more broad societal kind of scheme. But anyway, in these schools, when we were deciding how to do this, we already have a noon meal scheme that was probably a pioneer in the country and very well fated and all that. But in that scheme, if we spend 100 rupees on the scheme, actually we spend a few thousand crores, 70% of the spending goes for the pay of the people who make the food. And only 30% goes to the actual food and the energy and the utensils and the infrastructure and all that. So we decided we would innovate. And then also, a lot of trouble, I'm sure you've read in the papers, when you try to do supply tenders for, thousands of tons, the odds of rent seeking or rigging go up a lot. So this time, with the Chief Minister's guidance, we split it into two. It said in the urban areas, we'll do automation, as little human touch as possible. There's so many startups in Tamil Nadu itself that do automated cooking only for certain types. So we customize the meals to use automated cooking. I mean, within the nutrition levels and the fiber and all that stuff and the protein. And make it as hygienic, as standardized, as predictable, as touchless as possible, and let the corporations do it. So we give the money to the local corporation, and the corporation runs these kitchens and runs delivery trucks, standardized kitchens, and runs delivery trucks to all the schools. In the villages, we took a completely different approach. We said, let's give the money as a grant to a group of women, self-help group of women who are formed from the mothers of the children. And just give them the money. It's their job to procure we give them the money and give them a place to make the food. But then it's their job to procure the ingredients, to cook the food and to deliver it. And the odds that a mother will do it better for the children than the state is quite high, in our opinion. So we distributed it and we get it. And we haven't seen the results only with 2 days, but we're very optimistic that this will work. And this is another example of how, in terms of sustainable quality and accountability, this will be a better outcome. The eminent economist and founder of the NIPFP in Delhi, Raja Chalaya, once quote that everybody wants devolution to their level of government. Right? So in the states we say we want it from the union to us, but we don't really do it from us to the villages or the panchayats. In fact, the history of state finance commissions and whether those reports are even taken up, whether the finance commission is constituted, whether the reports are taken up, whether actions are generated from that, and whether they're put into implementation, the results are not good. This is a study that was done a few years ago. Less than half the states had actually run a finance commission every 5 years, as had been required after the 92 amendments. In Tamil Nadu, we just got the report of the 6th Finance Commission. After we came to office as the finance minister, I'm the sponsor of the commission. I gave them an extra 6 months or 9 months because of COVID and all that. But I also gave them some additional directive. I said, whatever Tamil Nadu asked of the Union Finance Commission, we apply that devolving power from us down. And so we got a brilliant report a few months ago. We are about to table the action taken report in the House. So since it's not yet tabled, it's a bit private, but I can say that the recommendations include a lot of innovations. Instead of, giving the grants we give grants by village or by taluk or by district, but then we give it to the Rural Development Ministry and they're supposed to administer the grants. And the history is that once they get the money, sometimes it goes and sometimes it doesn't go. So, there's a lot of innovations we can do. I, for one, as a former investment banker, I always believe in aligning incentives. If we don't back our preferred outcomes with the right money, then, it's like shouting into the wind. It means nothing. So I think in the next few months, you'll see when we table the report and when we go through implementation, that we're going to use the power of grants much more effectively and make it much more direct and bring technology to play so we can actually track that money is spent the way it's supposed to be spent for the people it's supposed to be spent, etc., at the time it's supposed to be spent. In fact, government fails in many ways, but one of the worst ways is that the gap between intent and outcome is only partially because of subversion or partly, or rent seeking or, malfeasance. Many of the times it's just a lack of competence or a lack of incentive alignment or a lack of focus, a lack of desire to get it done. And in that sense, I think, we can improve a lot of things if we just focused on those variables. Our philosophies may vary, different parties may come from different perspectives. It's only after we get the results that we get to say which is a better philosophy than not. Of course, some things are really bad. Bigotry is bad, hatred is bad, othering is bad. But otherwise, should I go slightly left or slightly right or slightly more devolved or slightly less? I think people who deliver results get to speak with a much louder voice than the rest of us. So let me just stop there, I think, and open it up, if that's okay.
P.T. Rajan, for really a fascinating lecture on this very important occasion for Manthan. Fascinating lecture on a very important topic. At a time when the flavor of the era is centralization, extreme centralization, one India, one everything. To talk about decentralization, talk about devolution is very important. And as you said, if at all there is any discussion, it's about the center and the states. There is very little about states to the local bodies. And you've given a number of examples as well as across the world about where and how it works. Thank you again. Thank you very much. We now open the floor for questions. Please ask your questions. And
I pray that his soul rest in peace. Now coming to the topic, since Finance Minister of Chennai is here, I was part of his last session where he attended in ITC, but I could not get the opportunity to have a direct question to him. Since I got the opportunity through Manthan, I want to ask a couple of questions to Finance Minister. Finance Minister, since you told that important thing about accountability and education, which will progress the great nation of India. So seeing around the inconsistency and the central government's dictatorship, be it in terms of education and denying education to the minority children. Let's say an example of a hijab, which is going on a debate in the Supreme Court. And you told that education is something which will progress. And the issue was being first highlighted politically. Now the Supreme Court is discussing the issue. Number one. Number two, the social unrest, be it if you take geographically or economically and socially, we are very much as an Indians are ignoring this fact that what is the unrest happening. If you see geographically the unrest, the China is taking over, India in terms of occupation in northern states and where China is occupying. And if you see economic interest, everybody is experiencing what is the economic interest we are facing in terms of unemployment, poverty, and be it GST or anything if you say. So you as a finance minister, how we can stop this? Because it's been more than 2 decades now, but still BJP is progressing and RS is progressing, and it is not good for the democracy that so much unrest is there, but we still as an Indians are ignoring this. Thank you.
Assembly member, I'm a state minister, I look at what's in my domain. I would just say generally 2-3 things should be true and eventually are always true in a democracy. One is that the more harmonious, the more inclusive, the more compassionate the society, the more likely you have long-term good outcomes in jobs, in growth, in quality of life, in quality of infrastructure. I think that's beyond debate. The second is that if you have this continuing gap or looming gap between the aggregation of power on the one hand and the worsening outcome on the other hand. It's not good for a society. Normally, markets don't correct gently. They correct violently or with volatility. I would say that at the end of the day, people get the government they deserve. People elect their government and they get the government they deserve. So, just like my finance professors used to teach me that you shouldn't think you're smarter than the market. I don't think I'm smarter than the voters on average. They'll vote their way and get their outcome. I can't second guess them. I just point to the fact that this devolved model produced phenomenally good results in the first wave of COVID. If you remember, Kerala was much, much better than all of us, certainly much better than Tamil Nadu. Somehow, by the time the second wave came around, Kerala had as bad or worse outcomes. So I think, generally speaking, I agree. I think Kerala is a much more devolved and therefore much more local self-governance and therefore much more, access to self-determination model than we are. We certainly will increase the devolution after the sixth Finance Commission. But some things, I think, if I say something, it'll sound like I'm biased because I'm sitting at the state level. But there are a lot of examples of devolution going really bad. Elections not being run, jobs not being occupied, violence, murders. So, you have to first create some kind of harmony. In fact, a lot of economists and a lot of IAS officers would say that had we developed faster in Tamil Nadu, we wouldn't have gotten as good outcomes in bringing the rural population up to somewhere near urban levels. It's only because the land departments drove consistency in the school or the meal scheme or whatever. So I think it's safe to say that the direction should be towards greater devolution. There is no reason we should have to go the other way. As we progress, as the per capita income goes up, as the scale goes up, as the complexity goes up, it all argues for more devolution. In fact, it argues for devolution a different way, meaning if I allow 400 different points to make decisions and take control, the odds of spectacular failure coming from one place, like a 4-hour lockdown or a demonetization, go down a lot. Right? The problem with concentrating power in one hand, one bad mistake can just completely ruin an economy or a society.
Involving, to the local bodies. But what if the state doesn't participate at all and give it to more free enterprise? Because there's a nuance or a balance between the two. So what's your opinion on what that level of balance should be? I know it's a hard question, but I'm just trying to figure out what heuristics you would apply to making decisions there.
The Justice Party. There are clear rules for the state, for quasi-state, which we consider the cooperative sector, which is not profit-seeking, participatory, but not other than the kind of gentle support or oversight of the government. It's really a people-run enterprise, and then there's private enterprise. So, provision of public goods and services should be done by the state. Running of infrastructure, for the most part, should be done by state. Now, done by the state doesn't mean that I'm against PPP. Doesn't mean that I don't want private investment order. I'm saying the control of pricing and the delivery of quality is the responsibility of the state for public goods and services, whether it's drinking water or garbage removal or sewage, pipe development or whatever. Then there's things like insurance, housing societies, crop loans and all, which is better run by cooperative, not-for-profit mutual societies. And then, clearly innovation, large manufacturing, large service organizations, startups, tech hubs, all these should be done by private. The state has no business. In fact, I'm also the Minister for Human Resources Management of the state. The state is a very inefficient operator altogether. The cost of labor is very, very high, 2-3 times the market. The alignment of incentives or accountability is very low. So there are many things the state simply should not get into. I think there's new models of hybrid kind of PPP and other versions of many versions of PPP that can actually alleviate a lot of the problems. I agree. The state should not go where it doesn't have to.
Financial devolution is on one side, but financial discipline on the other side. And how do you put the checks and balances in the system? Because we've had now a case of Sri Lanka. We being a larger nation, it may not have happened yet, but if it happens, it could have a very far-reaching conclusion.
So I'm yet to see any state where the provision of freebies broke the exchequer or broke the balance, right? Or what they call freebies. I don't have it with me this evening, but I showed it this morning at the other debate. Every year we get 2 letters from the union government. We have our FRBM Act equivalent. They have this. When they need to, they amend. I think the last year's fiscal deficit of the union government was close to 7%. The FRBM says 3. The Finance Commission says make it 3.5 or 4 or 4.5 based on COVID and all that. Still, 7 is a long way away. They amended their act. Nobody else can ask them a question. We all amended our acts. It doesn't matter what my act says, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12. It's within my right constitutionally to amend my own act. Their act only applies to them. My act applies to me. But then they send me these letters every year. They say that because of Section 293(3) of the Constitution, Article of the Constitution, where you cannot borrow without my consent as long as you owe me money, I'm hereby telling you that you can only borrow down to the last crore, this many rupees, and only so much of that from the market at this time. They constrain us in 100 ways. Now I'm saying if they already constrain the total borrowing and the kind of fisc, on what basis should somebody tell me whether I choose to spend that money on giving rice or giving laptops? So that's what the people elect us for. So I'll break all 3 separately. I'll say I don't know yet any government that went into deficit and failed because of so-called freebies. There is a whole nuanced debate to be had about which investment is more accretive, which has a higher multiplier effect, which is inflationary, which is only for risk management or mitigation, which should be applied only in extraordinary circumstances like COVID. That's a nuanced debate that thoughtful people should have, not by diktat. And then there's a separate question of why should the union be in the business of telling states what they should and should not do? They've already told us how much we can borrow. They've already told us how we have to keep the macro under control. Then we have, non-discretionary expenses. We have to do payroll, we have to do pensions, we have to do a bunch of things. After that, how we choose to spend our money, that's what the people elect us for. Why should some extra constitutional diktat come telling us what we can or cannot? That's the principle. Are there good and bad ways of spending government money? Absolutely. That's a whole separate debate. Why is somebody else telling us what we should do? The people elect us, we do. If they don't like, they throw us out and get somebody else, right? That's a separate debate altogether. And I reiterate, I am yet to see any government that has gone in violation of its borrowing limit or become bankrupt or defunct in the government outside the country of India based on giving something for free. The fisc has been mismanaged 100 ways. But I don't know an example. You'll have to give me an example before I reconsider my view.
Acknowledge the august presence of Dr. Nadu, former Finance Commission Chairman. And during his term as Chairman, he had allocated much more to the states. We must all appreciate that. However, I keep reading that some of the states are in huge debt. Of course, it's a kind of supplementary to that question. How is it that Punjab, Tamil Nadu, and Bihar and Bengal have such huge debt, and whether they can, how they are going to manage, you as Finance Minister can enlighten us. Second question is, Telugu is a mother tongue of a large population in Tamil Nadu. Unfortunately, the language Telugu has been dropped from the school curriculum, I understand. And now those who speak Telugu, they have gone to the appeal to the Supreme Court now. The case is in Supreme Court to include the Telugu language again in the school syllabus. Now you talked about two-language theory, that only English and Tamil. But I think you killed the Telugu language in Tamil Nadu.
School, I'm not sure that you offer Tamil in Andhra Pradesh or in Karnataka. So, there's no guarantee that I should do for you what you don't do for me. So, I don't have any sympathy for it. I'll find out what the law is. But you're completely misinformed when you talk about the debt. So, either you don't understand how to look at debt or you don't know how to read the stats. You have to look at debt as a percentage of GSDP, not as random numbers. The scale of the economy is much bigger than the scale of Punjab's or West Bengal's. So, the conventional measure of looking at debt is called debt to GSDP. In debt to GSDP, the four states you mentioned, there's a gap of 10% at least in the debt to GSDP numbers. So, you should be better informed. I tell you what the situation is in Tamil Nadu. In Tamil Nadu, at the onset of the FRBM Act, the debt to GSDP ratio was about 26 or 27%. Over 11 years of continuous improvement across ADMK, DMK, and ADMK, the ratio came down to 16% debt to GSDP, one of the best in the country. After the illness of Ms. Jayalalitha, incarceration first, then illness, then death, her successors took that ratio back from 17% to 16.5% to 26-27%. We have come and we have kept it there, and I'm committed in the next few years that I'll bring it back under 20. Before anybody comments about my debt to GDP ratio, let me tell you that the union government's debt to GDP ratio is more than 60%. By some measures, if you take all the PSUs, is 90%. As I asked before, I'm asking you, is it that the children of Tamil Nadu pay back the government of Tamil Nadu's debt and people from Mars pay back the union government's debt? No, we all have a share in that. Ask some reasonable questions, right?
It's a hypothetical question, but I hope you'll answer it. If you were to be made the Finance Minister of India, which I hope you will, what are the first immediate steps that you would take to bring the economy back on a rate?
It's harder than anything I've ever done. By God's grace, we are delivering results that are unprecedented. There's still probably 4 or 5 years work, but I've committed that in 2 years we'll become a revenue neutral state, which is after 7 years of record deficits. In 3 years we'll come back to revenue neutral, which means that by 24-25 we'll quadruple our capital investments from 37,000 crores to about 1,30,000 crores. If I can pull that off, that's the biggest achievement I'll ever do in my life. I don't have any ambition beyond that. I can barely do the job I have now. I have no vision about other people's jobs.
Doctor-patient ratio. You also spoke about how the medical colleges, the hospitals, the primary, the second primary are so interconnected. Would you like to throw some light on that first? Secondly, you also said that the union government should actually come and learn about the medical system in Tamil Nadu. So how well have you been able, I mean, when I say you, it's the government, to sell your idea of the medical system to various other states in India or through your MPs in the parliament? And, how would you describe it? If you can just throw some light on it.
I have never said that anybody should come and learn from us. I have never said a begrudge putting in 1 rupee in taxes and getting back 35. I have never said that my right to self-determination should be absolute. All of it starts from the other end. Because you try to thrust something down my throat, because you tell me that you know better than me, because you say I should follow your standard, then I ask the question, why should I? On what basis? Right? What health system exactly does the union government run? Other than a few aims, what does the union government run? How many million people does the union government directly provide health services to? Why should they come and tell us how to do our job? We have 80 million citizens. We know what we're doing. We have very good outcomes. So the point I was making is, if you include into something like saying you shall follow this entrance test only and not give priority to people who are willing to serve in rural areas, or not give priority to poor children who have only been able to go to government school, all the things we used to give, I ask, either it should be based on you having a better outcome, but you can't have because you don't done anything other than a few institutions of high excellence. Or you should say that we have done badly, but we have done better than everybody else. Or you should say it's a standalone thing that doesn't affect everything else, but it affects everything else. Or you should say it's my money, therefore I tell you how to spend. It's not. We spend the money entirely. 20,000 crores a year we spend of our money from the state's revenues. So my only question in all of this, right, I am not a combatant. I am not here to fight with anybody. I got a day job to do. That's a hard job. It's only when somebody starts trying to interfere with our ability to execute or tries to tell us we should change a model that is working for us. I mean, there are 100 things we can improve in our health department. I'm the first guy as finance minister to say, I must have a better patient information system. I must have a better hospital administration system. The number of debates I get into and say, unless you do this, we will not provide additional funding. There are many things we can do. Will we get good outcomes? Absolutely. Are we spending the right amount of money for it? No, we're spending way too much money. Or rather, for this money, we should be getting much better outcomes than this. So all that is true. I'm not saying that we're perfect. I'm not saying that we won't listen. After we came to government, in every field, we have appointed advisory committees or panels or commissions. In our own department, we have one for economic advisors. We have one for reform of audit. We have one for litigation risk on behalf of the government. We have one for federal fiscal relations. We have one for human resources. Now, we take eminent people from around the world and we take their advice because we know we can always benefit from it. It's the diktat that bothers me. Diktat coming from people who neither have the constitutional basis to do it, nor a track record of delivering better, and simply telling us you shall do because I say so. This seems like perverse logic to me. That's the only thing I'm pushing back against. I'm not looking for any confrontation with anybody. That's not my job, right? I have delivery, I have results to deliver. That's what I focus.
Because of technology. It is possible that because of technology, banking transactions, for instance, they are now using CBS, and branch which were distributed things are now being centralized in one place. And at the stroke of a single button, we have 1 million monkey bots and crores of fake messages going on. Don't you think that in the context of of technology, devolution of powers will be more difficult and transaction costs will be cheaper when as technology progresses?
A couple of countries, and I ran banking operations in tons of countries as a managing director. I would say there are some things that we do in India far better than any country I've seen in terms of the payment system, in terms of the maximum time between drawing from my account and deposit in another account, in terms of the connectivity of UPI and all that. We are very far ahead. I don't see that as de facto driving to centralization. For example, in the government of Tamil Nadu, we can easily separate visibility of data from authorization to activate. Right? You can still say only the village can make the payment, but I can see what's happening in the office. Because I would say two things. One, there are lots of places where we collect data and do nothing with it. In the GST Council, I keep asking. There is no greater treasure trove of data than the GSTN's data, right? How often do you find one institution that has 100% of all transactions can be analyzed for time series? If we implement some policy change, we can look at the 3 months before and the 3 months after and find out what did it really mean. I have never yet been to a GST Council where there is any conversation based on data. Everybody has one philosophy, another perception, another imagination. Nowhere is our debate informed by this is the hard data. There is a simple example. We said we want to go to 0% GST on medical, COVID-related medical supplies and devices. Some states said no, 5%. I asked the question, how much is the total volume of such devices? Is it 5,000 crores? Is it 500 crores? Is it 50,000 crores? Then we'll know what the loss of 5% is. There is no data. So there's a lot of places where we collect data. I'll give another example. COVID data is uploaded into a union government database. Every single vaccine of every single person. Of course, there's errors. I get on my phone claiming I've had a vaccine and I haven't. That's a different issue. But every single vaccine is captured. One of our economic advisors told us ahead of the third wave, one way to find out your hotspots of risk is to do kind of overlay of 3 different surveys. Survey number 1, what percentage of people have been vaccinated? Survey number 2, what percentage are either very old or chronic illness or whatever? And survey number 3, there was some, what percentage of antibodies? Let's do antibody tests, how many have antibodies? The first 2 we could do. The third, when we want to get the data, there was no access to the data. The union, not only were we not using it, the union government was not using it for anything, other than to say rough percentage is this. They were not actually using it. So we wanted to know street by street, block by block, what percentage of people have been vaccinated. So, just because you can collect data doesn't mean that people are actually using the data. And just because you have the power of zero marginal cost data doesn't mean that you have to centralize. The data can be in one place and still the authorization to activate or deactivate or do whatever can be still vested in the local. For example, one of the things we're going to do is send these funds, and this is why I've been saying for a long time that we want to apply for a payments bank license, because we do DBTs and all. But were I to have a payment bank license and have a wallet for these people in my bank, then I could analyze all kinds of things about when they draw it, what is it likely to mean about their spending patterns, what is it likely to mean about their economic situation. If I change something, how does that reflect? Because then it'll be more data. If I try to get it from some other vendor, sometimes I give it, sometimes I don't. So I'm not sure that, I think on the whole, better technology, better systems are positive without that much downside, unless they are intentionally either negligent and nobody uses it, or designed with malintent. Right? A lot of the union government's data collection is designed with a different intent. Then we have some concerns about it.
It is to actually participate well in a well-devolved system. For instance, here we have Manthan. How many districts, how many villages have a Manthan going on? And how is it that in every village, in every town in Europe, they have built squares where people can come and meet spontaneously to discuss issues of interest? And none of our villages or our towns or cities have this convenience, where people can come and talk to each other about issues that concern them. Why is it that our states do not build infrastructure for people to meet, citizens, basically to meet each other? That is fundamental, I think, to devolution. You can't have proper devolution if you don't have the skills or the infrastructure.
Mondays, which is like the tree, under the tree or in the central place, these exist in almost every village, every town, every block, or every ward in every city. So if it's a question of places to meet, in my own constituency, for example, there are probably, 16 wards now. I would say maybe 10 or more of these wards have either a community hall or, otherwise public gathering place that belongs to the corporation, which is not built up, but it's just open, what they call Monday. It's like an elevated piece of, land under a tree. The first is a more complex question, right? We try our best in Tamil Nadu to run training programs. And actually, I'll go one step back. I was just recently in Australia on a government visit, and I was somewhat gratified, or no, I won't say that. I was somewhat less disheartened to hear from a minister there what I've been saying about India is that the skills required to be big enough in your party to be given a party ticket. The skills required to win election without paying money or using extraneous variables. The skills required to be a good legislator, to actually read the bills and have an informed view and, be able to communicate with tens of thousands of voters. And the skills required to be a minister, there's very little overlap between those in today's India, right? But at the end of the day, we're a democracy. So whoever gets elected, we can't get to predict or control who gets elected. What we can do is once they get elected, do a lot of training and do a lot of upskilling for them. So at least in Tamil Nadu Assembly, we do that a lot, both for the general MLAs. We run like a 5-day induction program after they come. And when we started more recently, it was non-existent. We do for the, at least again, my department committees, the Public Accounts Committee, the Public Estimates, the Estimates Committee, Public Undertakings Committee. We run special trainings for them from the CAG. We send them on tours. At one point, I used to think these tours were just boondoggles. But I've now come to the conclusion that many people come with such limited views that sending them around for the marginal cost of traveling within Tamil Nadu, it's a huge win that it opens their minds and it gets them to see how different things work. In the corporation of Madurai, again, because I'm the minister for the urban area for my party, I try my best to get as much training as possible, particularly for the mayor, the committee chairman, the accounts committee chairman, the audit committee. We don't get to pick. The Constitution lays down what are the minimum qualifications. So we don't get to pick who stands and who wins. But we can do a lot after they win. And in fact, we should probably do much more than we're doing now. Certainly the Chief Minister is committed to it. We'll probably see if we can make a more formal and more elaborate training mechanism. I think it's needed more at the local bodies than the MLAs, but I think it's also needed for MLAs.
It is that over the past maybe 50 years, we've noticed that those who are knowledgeable, I'm not saying capable, those who are knowledgeable do not get an opportunity to rule. Maybe rule is a harsh word, but that is what it is in a democracy. But those who rule, over these past 50 years, I've not seen whether they are really knowledgeable. And one of the reasons I've come to listen to you is because I know you're both knowledgeable and you are there to rule. Now, my question is, isn't it time now that we come to a stage where, we have talked of reservations for so many other things, all in good interest, but keeping the vote bank in mind. Is it not time that we devote some effort in trying to see that there is reservation for those who are knowledgeable, not for votes, but for those who can determine and make decisions there sitting either at the assembly or at the local body or in the center? Because we have noticed at all three levels, irrespective of parties, that the knowledgeable in the party only attend manthans. The others sit in the assembly and decide as to how the booty must be shared. There is a very rarely a person like you, and I hope it's going to prove, what shall I say, you be a predecessor for a lot of others, that somebody who is knowledgeable, and I'm not saying again capable, that will only decide after your 5 years. If you are knowledgeable, we believe you are, and you have proved it on a number of occasions. If you are knowledgeable, isn't it time that we started having reservations for the knowledgeable in the assembly or in the local body? Otherwise, we'll only be reading what the social media tells us about what people are. We'll continue to have thousands of manthans over the years. I think there must be a quick solution to this. My generation
on a scale of knowledgeable, right? Who would be the arbiter? How would we come up with some universal consensus? I think I'll go a different way. It's a testimony to my leader, I think, to some extent, to circumstance that I get to sit where I sit, and not so much knowledgeable, but having executed and run large organizations and therefore being able to bring that skill set to this job. But the easiest way to do what you want would be to look at a presidential style system like in the US, right? Once the guy gets elected, he gets to only pick technically qualified people and they run the administration. But again, I'm not sure where the trade-off is. Because even now in theory, in the Rajya Sabha, you can get people who don't have to go through election, you can get people who can easily come into the office without going through the rough and tumble of politics, which may filter out a lot of people that you might otherwise consider knowledgeable. But then again, what is the notion of democracy, right? I mean, I would say, at least in my case, I don't think I could do the job I'm doing today with all the other education and the experience and all the other things I brought to the table if I had not been opposition MLA for 5 years. And if I had not gone campaigning street by street, door by door, hands folded, and kind of develop the humility that brings, I don't think I could do the job that I'm doing. So I'm not sure that knowledgeable is a basis. If anything, I would go the other way. I'd say the defining characteristic of a politician ought to be empathy, ought to be consideration. Not, knowledge comes and goes. We can get good advisors, we can get good police officers. A genuine feeling for the people, I think, is probably more important.
My finance minister has come to Hyderabad, so I welcome you to Hyderabad. So this is more of a opinion than the question. Basically, you were talking about the urban bodies coming up with automation of food. So basically, what I believe is the more the touchless, the more the automation comes in, the more casteist it becomes, because we see a lot of Dalit cooks not being allowed to cook in a lot of schools, including Tamil Nadu and most of the states as well. And there were issues like when the public-private partnership comes in and they dictate what kind of foods the children should have, like the Sattvic foods in schools. So I firmly believe, as a student of Dravidian movement, I believe that Dravidian movement and the Dravidian organization should not encourage the automation. Rather, they should encourage more of Dalit cooks and.
Yes. If you say I'm only employing caste cooks, then I say it's discriminatory. I'm saying I can't afford to spend 70 rupees of every 100 paying for labor. That's not what a restaurant's cost is. That's not what any other food preparation cost is. I'm just trying to deliver my intended scheme, which is nutrition to the children at the lowest cost and the least complexity and the highest quality possible. I'm not saying that applies for everything. I'm saying in that particular instance, automation is hugely valuable to us. I'm not sure why that's discriminatory to anybody. I'm not sure I can go out of my way and say that instead of machines, I'm only going to employ Dalit cooks. I don't think that would fly either, because the reservation is only a certain percentage. I can't say 100% has to be Dalit cooks. So maybe that part I don't get. If you're saying is the system casteist, yeah, a lot of places are still casteist. We're still fighting. I'm saying we're a long way away from saying we've achieved full social justice.
Person from Tamil Nadu asked this question to Mr. Jaishankar. The thing is, in the minds of Tamil Nadu people, there is a Mardian kind of thing is there. Can you elaborate on this? Tamil word Mardian. This question and answer session was held in Thailand, and it was uploaded in YouTube also. Can you please elaborate on this?
Pleasure speaking to you. Sir, first of all, my question is twofold. First thing is, what's your opinion on GST? Because it's been 5 years and I think we should have an impartial debate on this. The second thing is, why is the devolution being politicized? This is for the first time, right? Because we've been studying for civil services and all this. For the first time I have seen this, that the rhetoric of devolution, financial devolution is an automated process. I mean, state takes the taxes and state gives back to the state. Why is this devolution being politicized? Political rhetoric. And what's your opinion on this? Right? We have seen the state doing this, we are doing the center doing this. Don't you think we should move forward from
2% to 42%? Two things happened. Right? Cesses and surcharges went from 6% of the total tax collection to 20%. I think the data tells the story. Neither has the union government ever used the cesses for the purpose it stated. Nor is the actual devolution close to 42%, it's closer to 30%, which is 32%. That was before. Most of all, if you take a state like Tamil Nadu, the percentage of money that comes to us from the union altogether is about 35% of what we paid in. But how that 35% comes in terms of share of taxes, which is effectively unpaid, or grants and schemes and increasingly convoluted grants and schemes, then that ratio is going very far against us. So it's not politics, it's basic math. We say, why are we getting our hands tied? Why don't you give the money the Finance Commission told you to give us? Why do you keep doing all this funny money accounting and trying to use politics and trying to develop kind of this this image of the benevolent emperor using our money? So there's no politics in it. It's just math. We're not getting our money the way we're supposed to get our money, so we're fighting for it. It's not like equally valid arguments. Those of us who are not getting the money are fighting to get our money. As far as GST is concerned, I've been very vocal about independent of regime, right? In fact, I echo the current Prime Minister's words when he was Chief Minister about GST a lot, right? Whatever he had to say of GST, I say the same thing. But the thing that really worries me is not about the design, is not about the intent, is not about the constitutional amendment. There may be 100 things wrong with it, or weak with it, or improvable about it. What worries me now is that in its implementation and its execution every day, so many things can be fixed. I said it somewhere else, I'll say it again. If, as the CEO of GSTN or the CEO of a bank, I had the executive capability to do so, I would hire 100 people, tax specialists, accountants, the legal experts, data analysts, system experts, and put them to work. There's at least 1 year's worth of 100 specialists of improvement that can be done to the GST system today. That worries me that we're not doing it. All of us do it as a part-time job. I'm a minister for 4 portfolios. Then I'm also on the GST Council. Then I'm also on 2 GMMs. Sometimes they meet, sometimes they don't meet. Sometimes the convener exists, sometimes it doesn't exist. When GMM I was on, the terms of reference said report shall come in 6 months. Within 1 month of that issuance of the terms of reference, the convener lost his job as Minister of Gujarat, therefore lost his seat on the GST Council, therefore was not convener anymore. 7 months went by before they issued a new order putting a different person as the convener. The terms of reference expired, right? So I'm saying the implementation is so, it could be so much better, so much more improved, that whatever the flaws in the system, they become secondary. It's the law of the land. I don't see any way of unwinding this simply. But we could improve what we have very, very much if we apply the right kind of resources to it. That worries me a lot.